一陣間完咗去落下課。係啊，唔係去開會 retreat， 唔係公民數據流動性啊。
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We will start the second part. Mr. Simon Ng will comment on the speech given by Benny and Dr. Chen, and we will then have a Q&A session. Simon, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bella, and thank you very much for the two speakers this morning for the very inspiring talks, and thank you very much, everyone, for the attendance. My role is a discussant, so I would just try to limit my discussion in within, say, 10 to 15 minutes, and to allow as much as time possible for the floor to discuss. Now. All right. I would perhaps start by putting the three questions that we posed today. From the survey that we have done. To put that to revisit those three questions and to try to rephrase it perhaps a little bit, and to put that in a more theoretical context at first, and then come back to what the speakers have said in this morning. Now, I would try to rephrase the three questions into three aspects, if you like, of legal culture or the rule of law culture. The first is rule by law, government by law as a principle, okay, where in which we ask our respondents, the general public, as well as the internal operators, the personnel, the legal personnel of our system, to respond to the question whether rulers should follow the law they make. Okay, this is the first question we ask, and I would rephrase it a little bit as an indicator of whether they would agree we should have a system, we should have a government by law, okay? Now, the second question we asked was actually about whether disobedience is okay if it won't affect others, okay? I would rephrase it a little bit as a selective obedience, okay? It's not, so legal obedience is not a principle, but we asked the general public and our respondents whether they would agree or not. Sometimes, in some situation, we may select, to disobey, okay? Now, the third aspect would be what I call, I would paraphrase Lon Fuller's, from Lon Fuller's, if you are familiar with the legal thinker Lon Fuller, his book, a celebrated book, Morality of Law, okay, in which he proposed actually 8 requirements that law should have in order to have that, moral foundations. And one aspect is actually law should be eligible, should be readable, should be easily understandable by the general public. Okay, that is one aspect that he called the requirements of the morality of law. So I would try to rephrase our third question into into that framework, our understanding. Try to put that into that understanding. Now, in Cantonese we have 如果法律條文寫得唔清楚，令人唔知道佢講乜，就應該冇法律效力。Okay, in English we said a law should have no effect if the meaning is not clear, is not certain. Okay, now our finding is somewhat like this. All right, as far as government by law is concerned, as a principle, is actually our internal legal culture gives a very actually total agreement, okay, with that as a principle. Okay, government by law, the rulers should abide by the law they make. Okay, and the external culture, the general public, gives an overwhelming support for that statement. Okay, if we can compare that finding to another survey that I and Professor Guan, H.C. Guan, did some 10 years ago under a big project, the Social Indicator Project. Is an interversity project. The finding is more or less the same. We can perhaps very safely say that that principle is actually quite well established. Okay, if that is if that is a good indicator of of the acceptance of that principle by the general public. We may say, quite safely that principle is already quite well established in Hong Kong, okay? Government by law. The rulers must be bound by the law they made by themselves. Now, the other principle would be selective obedience to law. Now, you can see that, the general public actually would say no to that statement, meaning that they actually would prefer a more obedient culture, legal culture. They would abide by the law. They would, take obedience to law as a general principle, if you like. Now, the third aspect, the third question, now, for me, is not a very, we actually, when we discussed, when we conceived, when we discussed the project, the research, we kind of, refer to, we had different kind of references. We kind of, think of this, how to draft the question into our, try to fit it into our framework, as well as, try to make some reference to some theoretical justifications. We were actually in some struggle, having some struggle there. But anyway, it's not a perfect question, but the finding itself shows that, the general public, with a majority, they would, a marginal majority actually is just 53%, more or less, less than 54% would agree that if a piece of law is unclear, with an unclear meaning, it should not have any effect, okay? Now, we just take those findings as they are. Now, perhaps at this point, I would mention a little bit about what Lon Fuller has put forward as, under his framework of morality of law, the 8 requirements. More or less, you may refer that back to, try to compare that to what Benny has said this morning about the framework of thin and thick rule of law, the 2 different versions of the rule of law. Now, we have the existence of law as the first requirement. That is more or less like the very first level of, Benny's framework, our framework of the rule of law culture. The second would be law should be publicized. It should be made open to anyone, okay? The third is law should be prospective instead of retrospective. Fourth, which one of our questions has indicated, the fourth requirement is the law should be understandable, okay? Fifth, law must be coherent, must not contradict with each other. And number 6, law must not require the impossible, okay? You won't ask, say you won't make a law to prohibit anyone to sneeze, for example. It's just part of a human, it's impossible. The 7th requirement would be law must not change too rapidly. The 8th requirement is law must be the laws that are enforced. Okay, you don't have another set of laws there for the government to enforce, but what you publicize is exactly the same set of laws that should be implemented. Okay, these are, to Lon Fuller, the 8 basic moral requirements that a legal system or rule of law situation should have. Okay, now you have that idea, and you try to refer back to what Benny has said in this morning. Now, what do these findings tell us? What do these findings indicate? Government, by law, as a general principle, seems to be well established, okay? And overwhelmingly, agree, response to that. They indicate that, the general public as well as the internal culture, internal legal culture, accept, government by law. Seems to be safe in that regard. Now, general obedience to law is well established. People prefer to obey law, okay, as a principle, even though they are, given an option that, well, sometimes if it's not, if it's not too, disruptive, or if it won't affect anyone, you may have a choice to not to obey. But people seems to choose the otherwise. Okay, so we may safely say that general obedience to law is well established within our legal culture. Now, the third point, we may not have sufficient information to answer, the requirement, one of the requirements of the morality of law, okay, the aspect of illegibility. Now, but we have some indication here that the general public seems to expect that the law should be somewhat, should be a set of rules that should be clear and easily understandable by the general public, okay? But there are some methodological issues like, whether the questions are, well drafted as to the extent that it may sufficiently indicate, that people actually have a certain attitude towards one of the aspects of morality of law. So that is the findings. Now, given the findings, given the sort of normative framework given by what I rely on is Lon Fuller, and what the speakers have said this morning, we can have some more reflections. Like now, we seem to have, actually I think we would accept that the rule of law is a system, is a way, is an order that requires human conduct to be subject to the governance of rules. Now, that is speaking to both the rulers, the government, as well as the general public, the governed, okay? That's rule of law. You don't just require the general public to abide by the law, but on the other hand, you have another standard for the rulers, for the government. It's a whole. That requirements actually apply to both the government as well as the general public, internal and external, legal culture. Now, the fundamental moral requirements. What if these requirements are not met? Going back to the 8 moral requirements that Lon Fuller put forward, what if those requirements, or some of those requirements, are not met? So is obedience still justified? Then we have the discussion that we have this morning from KM and from Benny about civil disobedience. Is civil disobedience now? So you have that theoretical framework now. If the law or even the whole system fails to fulfill those moral requirements, is there any justification for not obeying the law? This morning, the talks seem to suggest that civil disobedience is a way out. Okay, if the law is not just, we have a justification to disobey the law and to advance through civil disobedient actions to bring justice back. Okay, to advance justice, to make the law more just, okay? But what is civil disobedience? Now, this morning we have listened to quite different, quite a lot of discussion about civil disobedience, but I think sometimes, at some point we can make a very simple definition, clear-cut definition, but at some points when we go further into the context, things become really confusing, okay? Now, as what KM has proposed, has mentioned about the different understandings, approaches, and versions of civil disobedience, even to a point that we might, or some people might, have moved to another direction, like being militant, okay, being violent. Some other further questions like whether, more proactive actions can be counted as civil disobedience, or it's just like, responding in a very passive way, holding up our, the basic principle of nonviolence? Or can we do a little bit further, be a little bit more proactive, like setting up barricades on the roads, like, trying to push the police line a little bit backward, or trying to, to occupy, taking active action to, say, occupy or regain the so-called civic square. Actions like this, are these still within the ambit of civil disobedience? That a question. There's also a tendency that some may have made use or take advantage of the term civil disobedience to advance something else, like being more like militant, so to say. All right. Now, it's very useful for, very helpful that Professor Chan has given us both the empirical and the subjective, the objective and the subjective indicators, data, to prove that civil disobedience or the umbrella movement actually did not do much harm to the society. I mean, the rule of law, we are still in a good position. Things are still in good order. We have more tourists coming in. That sort of things. Seems not a negative impact on our general, rule of law. But the whole thing, umbrella movement, civil disobedience, have been taken in as a sort of, as a language or as a target in political rhetorics, discourses, to, play in the hands, of the, pro-establishment camp, or, the government would make use of those languages and make use of those incidents to, counteract or to attack the opposite. Now, the main question, the basic question I would pose here as a discussant is that how has the umbrella movement inspired Hong Kong people in the understanding and the use of civil disobedience as a means to advance justice and the thick version of the rule of law? Now, this is, I think, is the basic questions we have to ask at this moment. We have all the empirical data here. We've got all the findings, subjective and objective. We have the discussion about obedience to law, not in the restrictive sense. It's not just like, whether you follow the traffic light when you're crossing the road. It's not that simple. It's more than that. It's about our understanding that the law, our law, may have failed to fulfill some of the moral requirements. At that point, civil disobedience comes in as a means to move forward, as a means to perhaps give us a chance to bring justice back into our law. Now, at some point, we may have to be specific. What injustice is there? What sort of law? Democracy? Electoral laws? What are we actually talking about? But I think the basic fundamental question is coming back to our context. What does that mean for us? Civil disobedience. And at the same time, when we are talking about civil disobedience, we are actually not just talking about, dismantling something or attacking something for no reason. It's not for self-interest, as Benny and KM has rightly pointed out. It's not just self-interest. It's something more. It's public. It's for general good. It's for common good. Okay. Now, in that light, how do you address the tendency of, by some fashions, of our society, for being too militant or even move towards hate politics? As I think we somehow very frequently come across when we open, when we watch TV news or whatever, hatred. How do we address those things? Now, the good thing is that Occupy Central movement, as initiated by our two learned friends here, they started with love and peace. Are those two elements relevant here, and how difficult at this moment now to advance a cause like this, still talking about love and peace, where the general public or some of our fellow citizens are actually doing something really contrary to that ideals, like being discriminatory to outsiders, not just to the mainlanders, to to say ethnic minorities, and being very disruptive in a lot of different aspects in our life. I mean, what are the place? Are there still role for love and peace to play in this civil disobedience movement? If there's one, what should our next step in practical terms, and how can we rely on those principles to bring the people in? Who are we talking about when we are saying Hong Kong people, Hong Kongers? Are they just, Chinese people, Cantonese-speaking people? Not really. There should be a meaning in here. And when we are talking civil disobedience, when we are talking our society, who are this? Who are they? Would they include people who are not with Chinese nationality, just permanent residents here? Who are we? I think that is the ultimate problem that we have to face and to find a way out when we are discussing civil disobedience for the public good and the way we are moving towards justice. Okay, so with that note, I would perhaps stop here and to let the floor to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. So now we're going into the Q&A session. So we welcome questions from you guys from the floor. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Sue Cham. I first like to thank all of you, especially all the speakers and the discussant. It's wonderful that in Hong Kong we have people like yourself, very passionate about love and peace, and I respect that you've done your best to bring some harmony to this very fractured society. First of all, thank you all very much, for doing this research, because from seeing the research results, we have an objective standard to say that, well, really the umbrella movement hasn't harmed our rule of law in Hong Kong. No one should be blaming all of you who stood your ground to have, civil disobedience. In my view, I think there are two things that has harmed rule of law more than the, umbrella movement. I think one is the disappearance of the booksellers from Causeway Bay. I think that is huge harm to the rule of law in Hong Kong. And the second one is the demotion of Rebecca Lee from the ICAC. I used to prosecute in the Department of Justice for many years, including corruption and commercial crime. Rebecca Lee was very upright and outstanding. And it is great sadness that her removal was so abrupt and I think without reason. A lot of my colleagues in ICAC feel very lost, actually. I think that sort of demotion of someone who is considered, a really passionate believer in anti-corruption in Hong Kong, which is an institution, is much more damaging to the rule of law, I think institutions like the judiciary in Hong Kong and the ICAC in Hong Kong are institutions which are public institutions that uphold the rule of law. It takes many, many years, generations to build it. We've built ICAC for many years. It's now very respected in the world. but it takes very little to destroy it, right? So I do feel that I think we should stand up more, for those sort of real attacks on our institutions in our society. I think the fact that, the department went to try to get an injunction to the judiciary, it's pulling in the judiciary into a sphere where it's political, I think it's very difficult for the judiciary to rule on these cases. But what's concerning is, at the end of the day, if our legislative council don't maybe have special investigations into the missing booksellers case and into Rebecca Lee's demotion, I think that's a greater affront to us upholding the rule of law. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just try to, from the logical point of view, So, personally, I believe morality is a very large subset. Our law is only a subset of this larger, universally definition of morality. So, what you have said, whether the law is sufficient enough. So if the law is sufficient enough, then we have to obey the law. And if we do not obey the law, that is the problem, because the antecedent is sufficient enough. For example, like murdering is very sufficient enough for us to obey a law. Under no circumstances, we should kill a people for whatever reason. But the antecedent that you have pointed out is that whether the law is sufficient enough, if this is questionable, then we do not have provided this antecedent, then whether we should obey the law is the question. And whether we violate the law is another question. So, for example, from provided Hong Kong like the current situation, we are questioning about some of the law, whether this is sufficient enough. Then I think it is questionable that whether the umbrella movement or civil movement is violating the law. That is my point of view.
Actually, this question has been discussed by legal philosophers for thousands of years, starting from St. Augustine to Aquinas, talking about unjust laws. And Martin Luther King, in his very famous speech, Letter from a Birmingham Jail, kind of advocating the civil disobedience movement, raised the same point that unjust laws, they are not laws. So now, but that's using a rather expensive understanding and the more sophisticated understanding of rule of law that I have advocated in my presentation. But if you use the very narrow understanding of Mr. Rimsky-Yuen, now, surely he will disagree that the laws are unjust, but I believe that he would say that even unjust laws, they are still laws. And therefore, everyone have a duty to comply with the laws. And I think that's a question that have been discussed for thousands of years. And now I think we, at least for a lot of people who believe in the rule of law, we will not be satisfied with such a narrow understanding of the meaning of law or the rule of law, that laws must have a moral content. But if a law that fails to satisfy some minimal moral standard, then no matter you call it law or not, the significance is that people are justified to break it in order to change it, to make it just again. So I think that's what we have put forward. And going back to the attitudes of the Hong Kong people, I would just also based on the questions we have asked, and some missing thing we are not too clear. Now, from the questions, we can see that the general public, if laws they're uncertain, okay, they should not have legal effect. So though it's not a very overwhelming result, but at least the majority, 53.2%, agree that uncertain law should not have legal effect. Now then we have another two questions, as pointed out by the other two speakers and also from our results. The rulers should follow the laws, and all government actions must be based on law. These are overwhelmingly the general public. They consider that they agree with these two statements. Now, but we come to a point that has not been asked. If the rulers have the power, unlimited or very wide power, to interpret some uncertain laws and then give a meaning to those laws, now, how we should treat them? We have not asked the people about that. But that exactly is the situation Hong Kong is facing. The umbrella movement was triggered by the interpretation given by the Standing Committee to the basic law. Arguably, you may say there's some uncertainty there, but I believe that that's actually quite certain. But, okay, there might be some kind of uncertainty there. But then the Standing Committee exercised almost an unlimited power to give meaning to some uncertain laws, and without due process. It is not through a judicial process, not through a legislative process. It's basically just the Standing Committee decide, and that's it. No way for people to raise objection to the interpretation given to some uncertain laws. Now, how the people will react to that? Now, I think from what happened, we see that the people react strongly against that. Now, we could not say that if you ask the people 50% or more, that's surveys of this kind only can ask people about yes or no, agree or disagree. But we cannot, some degree of intensity there, strongly or agree or strongly agree, but that we cannot actually measure the intensity of the people's response. But looking at what happened, people occupied the streets for 79 days. That's much more than just answering a telephone poll saying that I agree or disagree with something, or I strongly agree or strongly disagree with something. They use their actions to demonstrate that how strongly disagree with such a decision, that an authority has an unlimited power to give meaning to some so-called uncertain laws. Now, it's not just the Standing Committee that enjoys such a power. The chief executive under our Hong Kong system may also have such a power. And that's the recent controversy over the swearing of oath by some of the legislators and then the judicial review actions. That may, and also examples mentioned about the Rebecca Lee's kind of treatment and the bookseller situation, all reflected that under our existing system in Hong Kong, we have uncertain laws. Sure, I think any system has uncertain laws. But how to clarify the uncertainty of laws? Then we have not included other questions, but other questions included about procedural justice. That I think also that's a very strong support that would be about procedural justice. And uncertain laws, their meanings could be clarified through an independent judicial process. I think that will be people accepted, that Hong Kong people will accept. But now we have a situation that the uncertain laws, the meanings, could be clarified by some unlimited power of the rulers. Now that might be the problem, and we have not asked the question. We cannot be very sure that whether we have the legal culture against that. Okay, But I trust that if we ask that question, likely that we might have also something marginal. And that's why in Hong Kong is a divided society. Even if we say that more people will be against such unlimited power, but it will not be overwhelming. I think at least some people will say that, well, we still accept the kind of understanding the standing committee has the power, and so it gives meaning to the uncertain law. We have to accept that. And that may still be accepted by a substantial number of people. I cannot be sure which side will be the majority. But even if we have conducted the result, it may be very close. It may be talking about 50 to 40, something like that. Or maybe that we have a lot of people who could not decide. And there may be undecided. We have the you that are undecided. In most of our questions, the undecided are very low percentage. But if we ask that question, we might have a very high percentage of undecided, because it might be the kind of situation Hong Kong people are facing, that we have the one side, we have the political reality that the standing committee and the chief executive enjoying all these powers. And we have another side that we kind of support certain laws, justice, but how we can achieve or attain both, and it may be very difficult and impossible, maybe under the present situation. So they may choose to retreat and undecided. And that might be another possible result of if we ask that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Okay, thank you.
Professor Tai, you mentioned that apart from law, we need other limitations, including civil society and press. I think from a personal experience, I worry particularly about the weakening press freedom, the effect it has, because, as you're saying, the legal culture plays a large part in the perception of justice in society, and I think the media plays a very large role in forming of the public opinion. And this is an area that, as you understand, that is under rather grave threat. And we see a large number of media workers, who have a very clear understanding of a civil society, civil rights. They find it increasingly difficult to survive in the current mainstream media culture. And I think that's really a very worrying area. And it seems like, I don't know whether you would agree that certainly you were saying that it's not a mainstream understanding of legal culture, this concept of justice, and you were saying that the goal of rule of law is the pursuing of justice. It seems like that area, members of the public seem to be rather weak in their perception of that, and some people even will have this perception that it's right that people who, try out civil disobedience are prosecuted and arrested. That is achieving justice. That seems to be rather different from our way, or the way that you were talking about just now, the understanding of justice, whether it's universal value, freedom, democracy, rule of law, or whether they've simply take this rather thin interpretation of rule of law. What would you say to that?
I think you have made right comments about, or worries about, the Hong Kong's rule of law situation. We have already organized a seminar on the protection of civil rights, including the freedom of press. And the speaker is Kelvin Lau. And he will come and talk about the protection or the media freedom. And it will be on the 15th of December.
17th of December.
17th of December. So he will provide a more detailed analysis of the about the situation of the press. And it's not very encouraging. I would say that it's not very encouraging. And I think the point you make is also right, that about the attitudes of people about pursuing justice. I haven't got my figures with me, but we have a question. We have asked about which is more important, order and human rights protection. And actually, more people think order is important than human rights protection. So that's true. That's true. But those who support human rights more important, they might be in the minority, but they still have a substantial minority in the community. It is not talking about 10 or 20%. It's actually, they're close, but just a little bit more people emphasizing on order than human rights protection. That's the situation of Hong Kong. But we have analyzed also those who rank human rights protection more than public order. They are mainly those of the younger age and also higher education. We interpret that means that they are those who are more influential. They have a potential to influence the society in the future more because they're the younger, more energetic, and so they could think about different ways to change the culture of the society. And also they're the more educated, so that means that they have more way to shape the culture of the society. So we have a potential. I think I'm still optimistic that in the future that we could have a culture, the legal culture in Hong Kong that will rank, more people will rank human rights more than the social order if they conflict. Now, but that's the worry raised by Simon about the social actions now. I've talked about, okay, we might have the people, they have the potential with the energy and with the kind of intelligence to advance the cause more in the future. But if they tend to be more on the hate side, that is emphasizing hatred rather than love and peace, now that may not in the long run build up a more healthy legal culture for the rule of law. And I think it's important that we have to have civil disobedience. I think the civil disobedience, the civil, is what we advocate, the kind of love and peace. Even it could be, the people can be more proactive, but still it is love and peace. But when all the social action is based on hatred, insult, now that is uncivil disobedience. So what I say is that civil disobedience can help the development of the rule of law. Uncivil disobedience will not help the development of the rule of law, at least in the case of Hong Kong. That's the point that I want to make, and I kind of respond to what Simon has mentioned.
Thank you, Benny. Is there any other questions? Yes, please.
I'm wondering why you define it that way, though. Because most in the world look bigger. Civil disobedience is only defined by violence or non-violence. So if there's no impact, I don't care what this intention, because it is not, intention is a privacy within the person. So it's not in court, and it's not being judged by a judge. We don't need to judge the intention. Love have intention, so I don't see how intention will go into the civil movement. So I want you to clarify that.
I just relied on the literature on civil disobedience. I have actually the definition of civil disobedience that I've used it. I have gone through almost all writings on civil disobedience in this area. And actually, as I mentioned, violence and non-violence is not the defining feature of civil disobedience, but conscientiousness is the defining feature, that it has to be conscientious. That if you believe in something, if it's unjust, and you base on that, you advance the cause, and that is civil disobedience.
Well, but people like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, they take it as a defining features that you need to be non-violence, because as this lady has just mentioned, it's difficult to judge the intention of the participants. So that's why for many practitioners, they will take the form that is non-violent as the essential features of civil disobedience. So it's controversial.
Yeah, it's different opinions, but I think the point is not about just that.
But we talk about love and peace. We hope that this intention and form could be, understood by people. They're both important. But the first part may be something you have to reflect on yourself.
Let me clarify that. Because I want to advocate a much bigger movement to be inclusive of all civil disobedience. So it's based on a little more subjective, like are you from love or peace? That would be divisive. That's my worry. That's why one of the reasons why we define it as violence or non-violence, and we'll hope that everybody, even if you disagree with the methodology, that if it is a civil disobedience and also a non-violent one, that we can give them the support that they need because overall, eventually, that's intentions in the sense that if we are moving towards democracy, there will be a different variety of different people using different methods. I think that personal opinion aside, we need to be very inclusive so that the movement will grow stronger instead of more divisive and weaker. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to say something about this. I agree with Benny, what you have mentioned about the civil, how to distinguish the civil disobedience. For example, like the umbrella movement. So I'm not trying to judge the umbrella movement and those people participate in it. And also about the intention, I'm trying to check whether it is for my own self-interest. I take the other side, try to observe the rule. I'm trying to nurture the understanding, nurture the public with critical thinking. I'm trying to be understanding why these youngsters have to take this movement. I think this kind of disobedience is a constructive way. It's kind of not necessarily excluding love and peace, because I'm trying to be loving and understanding of the movement, why they have to take this action. This is what my personal feeling. So I'm trying to, I think the society should move in such a way that do not let a minority like Guangzhou, their minority to, to take some, to nurture the social darkness. This culture has to be nurtured with understanding in a constructive way. Yeah, this is what my point of view.
Thank you. So we still have 15 minutes, about 15 minutes. Is that anything? Yes. Yeah, can you press the button?
No.
Now? Okay, yes. Sorry. Being a staff here, I'm so unskillful of using the mic. Anyway, there is one keyword in psychology that, goes around and around, in my mind during this lecture. We have been doing a lot of analysis and also research and survey. But I'm thinking of the word learned helplessness. And when talking about the mass, the people, the 6-digit number of people visiting the occupied ground, so on and so forth. I think for any civil movement, the popular perception and action is important. So what is your analysis and outtake about people first appearing very keen, sympathetic, involved in the movement, and going through the past 2 years with so much disappointment, questions, suspicion, and denial. It almost, many people almost went through the stages of tragedy. Of course, the good theory says that from denial that at the end of the day you come positive too. But I was wondering, for any civic movement, the role of the people interpreting or taking the perspective, and therefore the action and the way they behave is important. So, Kim, you got the last slide about crisis ahead. So I was trying to contemplate, come few months, we're going to have a very important decision on the election of the chief executive. And do you anticipate there will be, again, same formula, the decision or the influence from the north, and therefore, the composition of the possible candidate, the behavior of the electorate, the electorate committee, so on and so forth. What do you anticipate to play out in the coming half a year, and what would you anticipate in terms of the behavior of people reacting to this thing?
I have no clue at all how Beijing is going to run the coming elections. If I were Beijing, I would choose someone equally conservative like CY Leung, loyalist, but more skillful, so that it won't bring further troubles to Xi Jinping when he is still in the process of consolidating his power, purging his own ranks. So this is what I expect they're going to do. So my hunch is that it's not CY Leung. But who knows? It's Beijing. It's always uncertain, I just know that I'm sympathetic to young people, why they are fighting for independence and also thinking about using more militant tactics. If Beijing told us that under one country, two system, we cannot have democracy in terms of free elections, young people will not give up democracy. They will just give up one country, two system. If we have tried so hard using these love and peace tactics to know a way in fighting for democracy, it is reasonable for them to think about other alternatives. So if CY Leung remain in office, it is a very clear sign that Beijing is going to shut down on any possibility of political reform and continue this hard-line approach to Hong Kong. And I believe that it will immediately create a situation that many people will find it hopeless. And I believe that for middle-class people, they will become even more cynical. And then another wave of immigration will happen soon. But for young people who are stuck here, I believe that they will be even more radical. So fighting for independence using more militant tactic will be a very logical consequence. Right now, I have been reading a lot about what happened in Eastern Europe under the communist regime. How can they maintain hope when the situation is in such a despair? I'm reading the autobiography of legislators. He is the leader of Solidarities. How can he maintain hope, maintain his peace movement when Solidarity was outlawed 1 year after it was established? And then the Poles had to live under martial law for around 10 years. Now, the reason why he succeeded, first, he got moral authority. Remember, he is the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize laureate. He also got support from the church, and 90-something of Poles are Catholic. So he got this moral backup for a peace movement. He has been under constant attack by young people, including his two sons. He got two sons who were also militants. And he was very much annoyed by his father, Wallace's, idea of peace. But the way, I guess, he can maintain this peace movement is because he was able to maintain solidarity among oppositional, forces. He was able to build an alliance with so many oppositional groups, including intellectual, trade unionists, and so on and so forth. And so I believe it is also important in Hong Kong that we need to create solidarity among, the oppositional movement. We need to, people who believe in love and peace need to compete with those who are thinking about more radical tactics. But we should be more inclusive in our heart. That sometimes we need different tactics to succeed in, fighting for democracy. But we need to compete with each other. Because in the context of Hong Kong, I don't see a violent movement will be able to appeal to the majority of Hong Kong people. So the peace movement needs to maintain its role in the mainstream society. We need to compete with the more radical movement. But we need to understand sometimes we need different, wings, different factions in a movement in order to create a dynamics. So that at the end, we might be able to negotiate with Beijing. Look at what happened in Mandela. At first, he used civil disobedience method to fight for, equal right and democracy. And then what happened? The regime responded with massacre. And so he turned his movement into a radical movement by setting up, underground militant force, using violence method against the regime for 20-something years. Only at the end that both sides, the regime and also the opposition force, understood that they couldn't, take away other sides. You have no ability at all to destroy the other side, and then they sit down to negotiate. And why they can negotiate is because there were dramatic changes in the regime. There are more practical leaders emerge in the regime so that there were political opportunities for them to sit down to negotiate. In the situation of Hong Kong, probably we might also need to go through a long process of, exhausting our energy to no result. And only at the end that people will come to the sense that we need to sit down to negotiate. This is my picture in my mind in the coming years.
Thank you. So we can take one more question, one final question. Yes, please.
Sorry, so tying to what you have just said, actually also links to the final question that Mr. Simon has posed about how the umbrella movement has inspired people to understand more about rule of law and so on. Do you think that the electrical election this year is actually a manifestation of what has happened in 2014, especially with the people's determination to vote, to get as much pan-Democrats to get into the Legislative Council as possible? Also, do you think about the solidarity thing? Because in my point of view, I think this year, a lot of the pan-Democrats are rather scattered, or it's harder for them to be united when you compare it to the other side. So, what do you think is the resolution, or do you have any point of view towards this difficulty? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, maybe I answer the question. There will soon be a result released. It's a survey conducted by HKUPOP that the question is asked that how many have you considered the winning chance of a candidate in your voting? In other words, have you participated in strategic voting? The result is that more than 40% of the respondents answered that they had considered the winning chance of a candidate. So strategic voting was much, much more than we expected, as confirmed from the results. So that, I would believe, is a manifestation of the umbrella movement in the electoral election. Why the people had to participate in strategic voting? In the past, the study showed that it was only around 15%, but now is now 40% or more. So that indicates that it changed quite a lot how the people consider in their voting And I think a very important factor must be the umbrella movement, and the result will soon be released. Then the sample size 1,060 something, so actually it's a reliable sample size. About the solidarity, I think all the comments made by KM, I totally agree. He kind of get to that point from looking at the history of Eastern Europe and especially Poland. Now, I may reach the same kind of conclusion based as a theorist of rule of law development, not in my capacity as a political activist, but also based on the theory and about how to develop the rule of law. I think the same kind of conclusions we could reach is about solidarity. It's important that the people of who wants to change the system, who want to make the system better, they should join together. Now, your observation is also true that we are less united than the other side. But I'm always a more optimistic person. I think KM can confirm that. I'm always very optimistic. Actually, we are less divided than in the past. And actually, we were much more divided than in the past. So we are less divided. I mean, those who want to change, less divided within the so-called the pandemic camp. It is not equal to solidarity, but it provides a better base to build up the solidarity. So I'm still optimistic and about actions we could take. It's still a long way to solidarity, but at least after the umbrella movement, after the vetoing the government's proposal, after the electrical election, I think actually we are less divided and come closer, much closer now. And as you can see that the pandemic, no matter you're talking about the radicals or we have not included the localists, right? It's just the pandemic. The radicals and the moderate, actually there's not much difference now between the radicals and the moderates. They all stand behind the president and try to influence the decision. And so they used all this kind of nonviolent tactics now. So I find that it's a stronger base for us to build up the solidarity. But it's still a long way. It's still a long way, but I hope KM will join with me in the work. He seems to be retired from the work, but I urge him to join me in the work, and we are going to do something in the coming months in the election of the EC, and so at the election committee, and so we hope that we can build up that solidarity, and it's important. But I have a response to the question raised about inclusiveness. It's a long game. It's a long game. So we are actually, I would still say that those who want change and who are willing to put in effort to bring the change is still not the majority of the community. We are still a minority, though we are a substantial minority, and we are more energetic minority and more educated minority. But still, we are a minority. That means that we still have to continue to build up the solidarity. And I think by advocating hatred, it will not be in the interest of the movement in the long run, or the change in the long run. We have to address to the Hong Kong society is still a rather conservative society. So that means that we will have to address the concerns of those of the other side who are still kind of struggling, as I say, undecided. That might be that 20 or 30% people facing the question I raised, they be undecided. They may, on the one hand, they accept the political reality, but on the other hand, they will want to do some kind of justice. So they may be undecided. So how to get them into the action? Now that's our challenge. So if we allow hatred to get into the movement, we may include people from the radical side, but we may lose those from, I would say, the bigger market. Is really talking about where we can build up the bigger market and where we can find the bigger market. I think we have to still base it on the civil disobedience, as I've mentioned, in order we can have a strong enough movement to cause a change. But this solidarity is something is very important. With hatred, you cannot have solidarity. Only with tolerance. And I would say love and peace may be asking a bit too much, but at least there's no hatred. It's important that you should not have hatred. Once you have hatred, that's difficult to build up solidarity. And we need the solidarity. We need the resilience in order to get the rule of law that we want. It's a long game. It's a long battle. And it relied on all of us to put in a lot of effort into that. And so it's more a strategic judgment. I'm not saying that what the point I say is absolutely true. I'm only saying that from the analysis of the Hong Kong situation, our strategy, I still believe in civil disobedience, but not uncivil disobedience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is our time's up. So I think through this seminar, we have established that obeying the law, the rule of law is not just about obeying the law, but obeying the law is absolutely one of the most important requirements of the rule of law. We'll save other questions for next time to do a little promotion. We will have our next seminar on do Hong Kong people trust our courts on the November the 5th. So our speakers would be Ms. Winnie Tam SC, the chairman of the Bar Association, and also Professor Anselmo Reyes, a previous High Court judge. So we look forward to see you next time, and thank you very much for coming today.
我要趕返去。
Okay.